My phone buzzed while I was cutting an apple. The screen showed only 4 words. Dad, please save me. I didn't call back or ask what had happened. I drove straight to my daughter's fiancé's luxury penthouse. The moment she saw me, she whispered, "Dad, we have to leave before he gets back." But as we reached the lobby, a cold voice stopped us. "Move aside, old man. She isn't going anywhere." He saw nothing more than an old father driving a beat-up pickup truck. He had no idea he'd just threatened the wrong man. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling at something in your chest, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Your city, your country. I want to know who is out here with me tonight. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but every lesson in it is worth keeping. The apple I was cutting dropped to the ground before I realized my hand had stopped moving. 3 words on the screen. That was all. Dad, please, now. I did not call Claire back. I did not text her a reassuring reply or ask what was wrong or tell her to take a deep breath and explain the situation calmly. 22 years of field work had stripped that particular instinct clean out of me. When someone you love sends 3 words like that, you do not ask questions. You move. I set the knife on the porch railing, pulled off my work gloves, and walked to the driveway. The F-150 was parked where it always was. Same spot, same truck, same rust, crawling up the rear quarter panel like it had somewhere important to be. The paint had gone from blue to a kind of defeated gray sometime around 2009, and I had never gotten around to caring. I climbed in, turned the key, and listened to the engine complain for 3 seconds before it caught. The heater took another 5 minutes to push warm air. I did not wait for it. Rural Virginia slid past the windows as I pulled onto the 2-lane toward the highway. Fences, fields gone golden stands of pine trees, with their first dusting of October color. It was the kind of afternoon that made you think nothing bad could happen. I had learned a long time ago not to trust that feeling. The drive into Georgetown took just over 90 minutes. I used every one of them. By the time I crossed into the district, I had already mapped the building in my head. Dominic Voss's penthouse tower in Georgetown, glass and steel, the kind of structure designed to make ordinary people feel small before they even reached the lobby. I had looked the building up 4 months ago when Claire first mentioned his name. Old habits. I parked the F-150 in the loading zone directly in front of the entrance, ignored the valet who came toward me, with his arms already moving in that frantic way they do, and walked to the front doors. The lobby hit me the way cold water does marble floors, high ceilings, chandeliers that probably cost more than my truck by a factor of 10. A doorman in a tailored jacket looked at me the way people look at something they wish wasn't there. I let my shoulders roll forward. I let my right knee carry a slight drag. I let my eyes go soft and a little unfocused, the way they do on a man who spends his afternoons on a porch and his evenings falling asleep in front of the television. Invisible. That was the word. When people decided you were harmless, you became invisible. I had used that fact in 14 countries over 30 years, and it had never once failed me. The elevator opened on the 38th floor. I found the door to Dominic's unit slightly open, the kind of slightly open that meant someone inside was too frightened to think clearly. I pushed it and stepped in. The apartment was immaculate in the way that said no one actually lived there. Surfaces too clean, furniture arranged for photography rather than for sitting in. Everything looked expensive and nothing looked touched. Claire was in the living room. She was shoving clothes into a canvas duffel bag, with both hands shaking so badly she kept missing the zipper. Her hair was loose and unwashed, Her eyes were swollen from crying that had been going on longer than this afternoon, and when she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, a sound came out of her that was not quite a word. Something between a sob and the kind of exhale you make when you have been holding your breath so long you forgot you were doing it. Dad. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. We have to go. He gets back from his 2 o'clock meeting by 3:30, and if he finds me here with my bags packed, he's going to Dad. We just have to go. I know, sweetheart. I crossed the room and took the duffel from her hands. I've got it. Let's walk. I kept my pace slow and easy, one hand on her shoulder, steering her toward the hallway. Her whole body was vibrating the way a person's does when adrenaline has been running too long and the body doesn't know how to come down. He took my car keys, she said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper as we reached the elevator. He froze the joint account this morning. I had $40 in cash and I didn't know who else to. Claire. I pressed the lobby button. You called the right person. She looked up at me. My daughter, 32 years old, standing in that elevator with her hands still trembling and her eyes full of something I had not seen in them since she was 7 years old, and had fallen off her bicycle and looked up at me from the pavement, asking if everything was going to be okay. I had told her yes then. I was telling her yes now. The difference was that at 7 I was making her a promise I hoped I could keep. Now I was making her a promise I knew I could keep. The elevator counted down. Claire watched the numbers with her jaw tight and her breath coming in short pulls. I watched the reflection in the brushed steel doors, the lobby below us taking shape, the marble floor appearing and standing directly in the center of it, holding a leather briefcase, and wearing a suit the color of charcoal, a man who carried himself like someone who had never once been told no. The doors slid open. Dominic Voss was 38 years old and had the kind of face that knew it was handsome and had long since stopped being grateful for it. He stood between us and the exit, with the easy stillness of a man who had never once considered that the other person in the room might not be afraid of him. His eyes went straight to the duffel bag in my hand, then to Claire's face, then back to the bag. And something shifted behind his expression, something that tightened at the corners and turned his mouth from relaxed into something colder. Going somewhere? He asked. His voice was low and almost pleasant, the way a door sounds right before it slams. Claire's hand found my arm. Her fingers locked around it so hard I could feel each one separately, and she stepped back and slightly behind me, not hiding exactly, but using my body the way you use a wall when the wind picks up and you are not sure which direction it is coming from. Dominic let out a short laugh through his nose. He walked toward us slowly, his shoes Italian leather. I noted the kind that ran north of $2,000, making a precise rhythm on the marble. He stopped 4 feet away and looked me over from the top of my flannel collar to the mud still on my boot treads, and the expression on his face shifted again into something I had seen many times in my life. The specific contempt of a man who had decided he was not in danger. Move aside, old man, he said pleasantly. Then he stepped past me, grabbed Claire's wrist, and pulled. Claire gasped a sharp, high sound and pulled back, but his grip tightened, and she stumbled forward a half step, her sneaker squeaking on the marble. I placed my hand over his wrist, gently. My fingers were visibly unsteady, the way old hands get the knuckles enlarged and the grip uncertain. I let my chin drop a little. Please, son, I said, and I put every ounce of tired, worried father I had ever observed into my voice. She just needs some space. We don't want any trouble here. Why don't we all just take a breath and... Dominic shoved my hand away so hard, my shoulder rocked back, and I took a stumbling half step to sell it, letting my knee buckle slightly catching myself on the edge of a nearby reception table. The valet behind the desk was very carefully looking at the wall. "You don't want trouble," Dominic said, and now the pleasantness was completely gone. His voice had dropped to something quiet and precise the register men use when they want you to understand. They are not making idle threats. "You drove up in a truck that belongs in a junkyard, and you walked into my building thinking you were going to take what's mine. You have no idea who you're dealing with." He turned back to Claire, his grip still on her wrist. "Every account you can access is already frozen. Your name is on a lease that I own. You try to walk out of here, and I will have papers filed by 5 o'clock that will bury both of you in legal fees until that embarrassing truck of his is the only thing left." Claire's chin was trembling. Her eyes were bright and wet, and she was fighting hard not to let him see it, but her lower lip had gone white from pressing it together. I let my shoulders cave. I looked down at the marble floor. I nodded slowly the way a man nods when he has run out of arguments and knows it. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'm so sorry, son." "You're right. We'll just let her get the last of her things, and we'll get out of your way." "I apologize for the inconvenience." Dominic's chest expanded. His grip on Claire's wrist loosened by a fraction, not releasing, just relaxing, and the expression that moved across his face was one I recognized from a very different context. It was the expression of a man who had just confirmed his own authority, who had just watched the opposition collapse and felt the specific pleasure of it. He turned his head toward the valet to bark an instruction. That was when I put my hand on Claire's back and walked her straight through the revolving door. I did not rush. I did not run. I walked at the pace of a man who has given up and knows everyone can see it, and I kept my hand on Claire's back the whole way, and I counted the footsteps to the truck 22, and I had the duffel in the truck bed and the engine turning over before Dominic's voice reached us from the lobby entrance, loud and furious, and already too far away to matter. I pulled into traffic. Claire was pressed against the passenger door, one hand flat on the dash, the other wrapped around herself, and she was breathing in the rapid, shallow way that meant the adrenaline was finally crashing. "He's going to come after us," she said. Her voice was raw. "Dad, you don't know what he's capable of. He has lawyers. There's a judge, he knows a local judge who owes him favors, and he told me if I ever left, he would make sure Claire." I checked the mirror. The lobby entrance was already half a block back. "I need you to look straight ahead for me." She turned to face the windshield, jaw-tight, tears spilling fast, now that the immediate threat wasn't directly in front of her. In the rear view, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled smoothly out of a parking structure 2 blocks behind us and settled into the lane 3 cars back. It matched my speed exactly. Claire was still talking. The frozen accounts, the keys to her car locked in Dominic's desk, 6 months of financial control, so gradual she hadn't recognized it for what it was, until there was nothing left that was only hers. I listened to every word. I also watched the SUV slow when I slowed, and drift right when I drifted right, with the practiced casualness of someone who had done this before, but not quite enough times to be good at it. "Where are we going?" Claire asked, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Home," I said. "Shortcut, less traffic this time of day." I took the next right onto a narrow commercial street, then cut through the back of a strip mall parking lot, timed a delivery truck to block the main entrance behind us, and slipped out through a service alley onto a road that fed directly to the on-ramp. 2 minutes later, I checked the mirror again. Nothing. 30 seconds after we cleared the service alley, I knew we were alone. Not safe. Just alone. There is a difference, And after 30 years of operating in places where that difference determined whether you went home or didn't, you stopped confusing the two. Claire had her knees pulled up to her chest in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around herself, and she was staring out the window at the strip malls and gas stations bleeding into highway on-ramps. The crying had stopped, but the aftermath was still written all over her. The raw skin around her eyes, the unsteady way she was breathing, the way her whole body kept bracing, like she expected something to hit her. "He called me 9 times yesterday," she said, her voice scraped thin. "I stopped answering after the 3rd one. He left voicemails. Dad, the things he said in those voicemails." She pressed her lips together hard. "I deleted them. I shouldn't have deleted them, should I?" "We'll talk about that later," I said. "Right now, I just need you to keep talking to me. Tell me how long this has been going on." She exhaled a long, shuddering breath. 8 months since it started feeling wrong. 6 months since I understood what it actually was. She turned her head toward the window. "He didn't start out this way. Nobody starts out this way. In the beginning, he seemed like someone who just really wanted to take care of me. He'd pay for everything, he'd handle everything. I thought that was what it looked like when someone loved you." "When did the accounts change?" "February." Her jaw tightened. He said it made more sense to consolidate, that managing 2 accounts was inefficient. He made it sound like accounting. A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh and had nothing funny in it. "Efficient. Like I was a subsidiary." I kept the F-150 at a steady 62. The highway was thickening with late afternoon traffic, commuters heading southwest, trucks making their afternoon runs. Normal. Unremarkable. Exactly the kind of cover I wanted. He said if I ever left, he'd make sure I had nothing. Claire continued, and now her voice was starting to fracture at the edges again. The control she was working so hard to maintain developing cracks. Not just financially. He said he'd make sure no one believed anything I said. He has a judge dad, a local judge named Mercer, who owes him. He told me that specifically. He wanted me to know that the system was his, and there was no point running to it. "Judge Mercer," I repeated. "You know him, I know the name." I did not elaborate. The Virginia state line came and went. The highway narrowed and the buildings thinned, and the first serious stands of hardwood appeared along the shoulders. Oaks gone, copper maples burning red, the whole landscape doing what Virginia landscapes do in October when they decide to remind you they are not just backdrop. Claire uncurled slightly from her defensive position. Her feet dropped to the floor. She was still holding herself across the middle, arms crossed, but some of the rigid brace had gone out of her shoulders. "Where did he think we'd go?" she asked. "Did he think I'd just disappear?" "He thought you had nowhere to go," I said. "That's different from thinking you'd disappear. Men like Dominic Voss don't think about where people go when they leave. They think about why people can't." Claire turned to look at me. "How do you know what men like him think?" "Government work," I said. "Lots of boring meetings." She stared at me for a moment. Then, despite everything, despite the swollen eyes and the shaking hands, and the 8 months of slow erosion that had brought her to a penthouse elevator with $40 in her pocket, she almost smiled. Almost. "You're the weirdest man I've ever met," she said. "You've mentioned that before." She turned back to the window. The trees were getting thicker now, the light going amber and long. Outside, a hawk was riding a thermal above the tree line, barely moving its wings. "I'm scared," she said quietly. Not to me specifically, more to the window, to the hawk, to the October afternoon that had the nerve to be this beautiful on a day like this. "I know you're here, and I know that's supposed to make it better. But I'm still scared." That's the correct response to the situation, I told her. Being scared means you understand what's in front of you. It's the people who aren't scared I worry about. She absorbed that, looked at the hawk until it dropped below the tree line and disappeared. Are you scared? She asked. I checked the rearview mirror one final time. Empty highway, late sun, a minivan 3 car lengths back, with a kayak strapped to the roof. No, I said. Claire heard something in that single syllable. Something she could not quite name, but recognized the way you recognize a sound you have heard before, without knowing where. She did not ask a follow-up question. She pressed her cheek against the cold glass of the window and closed her eyes, and within 4 minutes the rhythm of the road had pulled her under into the shallow, exhausted sleep of someone who has been running on fear for months, and has finally, for the first time, let themselves stop. The tires hummed on the asphalt. The pine trees closed in on both sides, and I drove. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires, and Claire woke up the way people do when they have been asleep somewhere unfamiliar. A sharp inhale, eyes open and wide hands gripping the door handle before she remembered where she was. "We're here," I said. She looked out the windshield at the farmhouse, white clapboard gone slightly gray at the edges, the porch wrapping around the front, the old oak dropping its first leaves onto the steps. Then she saw Sylvia standing at the top of those steps, and something in Claire's face broke open completely. "Mom?" The word came out wrecked, barely a word at all. She had the door open before I finished parking. Sylvia came down the steps at a pace that did not look like hurrying, but covered the distance very fast. And when she reached Claire, she pulled her in with both arms and held on with the specific grip of a woman who has been waiting to do exactly this for longer than the last 2 days. Claire buried her face against her mother's shoulder, and the crying that came out of her was the deep, ugly, uncontrolled kind, the kind that had been building for 8 months and had finally found somewhere safe enough to happen. "I've got you," Sylvia said into Claire's hair. "I've got you, sweetheart. You're here now." I stepped in out of the truck and got the duffel from the bed. Sylvia caught my eye over Claire's shoulder. She did not ask me anything. She read whatever was in my face, gave me a single slow nod, and guided Claire up the steps and through the front door without looking back. I stood in the driveway alone. The sun was dropping behind the tree line to the west, painting the sky in layers of orange and deep rose, and the temperature had fallen a full 10 degrees since Georgetown. I could smell wood smoke from somewhere down the road, and the cold earth smell of October that always meant the growing season was done, and something harder was coming. I looked down at my hands. They were resting at my sides, big hands, the knuckles enlarged from an old break on the right that had never set quite perfectly, the palms cross-hatched, with the kind of small scars you accumulate when you spend decades working with your hands in conditions that did not always allow for careful. A mechanic might have hands like these. A farmer, a man who had spent his life doing physical work in difficult circumstances. I thought about Claire at 7 years old, pedaling her bicycle down the end of this same driveway, hitting a rock, going over the handlebars in the specific slow-motion way children fall when they have no idea it's coming. I had been 20 feet away, and I covered those 20 feet in time that still surprised me when I thought about it. I got down on one knee on the gravel, and she looked up at me from the ground, not crying yet, still in the shocked second before the pain arrived, and she said, "Daddy, is it bad?" I checked her palms, checked her knees, nothing broken, bleeding but not bad. "Not bad," I told her. "You're tougher than the driveway." She had laughed at that. "Even bleeding," she laughed. I thought about her at 16, sitting across the kitchen table from me, with that particular teenage seriousness, asking me straight, "Dad, what do you actually do, like actually?" and me giving her the answer I had given her mother, in a slightly different form for years. Policy work, analysis, very tedious lots of reports. And Claire looking at me with those sharp eyes of hers and saying, "You always come home tired in a different way than other dads." I had not had an answer for that one. Now I thought about the valet in the lobby, the way he had found something fascinating in the wall while Dominic grabbed my daughter's wrist, and I stood there trembling and apologizing. The way Dominic had shoved me back and felt in that moment completely secure. The valet had seen what Dominic saw, a worn-out old man in a flannel shirt, slow and soft, and no threat to anyone. I looked at my hands again. These hands had disarmed men in 4 countries, had carried a teammate out of a collapsed building in Kabul in the dark, had signed documents that moved resources across continents and ended careers, and on 3 occasions that would never appear in any public record, had done things I had made my peace with a long time ago. I had not told Claire any of that. I had spent 30 years making sure she would never need to know. A sound came from inside the house. Claire's voice muffled through the walls, rising and then dropping again. Still crying. Still letting it out. I stood in the driveway until the last of the color left the sky, and the temperature dropped another 5 degrees, and the first star appeared above the eastern tree line. Then I pulled out my phone, looked at it for a moment, and put it back in my pocket. Not yet. I picked up the duffel, climbed the porch steps, and pushed open the front door. The house was warm and smelled like the pot of soup Sylvia kept going on the back burner from September through March, and somewhere in the kitchen I could hear my wife's voice, low and steady, talking Claire, back down from the edge, one quiet sentence at a time. I set the duffel by the stairs, hung my jacket on the hook by the door, and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to my daughter's breathing, slowly even out. Outside, somewhere at the end of the long, dark driveway, a pair of headlights appeared briefly at the road, then went dark. The soup was chicken and vegetable. The same pot Sylvia had been making since 1987, and she set 3 bowls on the kitchen table without asking whether anyone was hungry, because in this house hunger was assumed, and the only question was how much. Claire sat with both hands wrapped around the bowl, not eating, just holding it, letting the warmth move into her palms. Her eyes were dry now, but the redness around them told the full story of the last few hours. She had washed her face in the downstairs bathroom and pulled her hair back, and in the yellow kitchen light, she looked simultaneously like the 32-year-old woman she was, and the 10-year-old who used to sit in that exact chair doing homework while Sylvia cooked. "He canceled my health insurance," Claire said to the soup. "I found out 2 weeks ago when I went to refill a prescription. The pharmacist told me I wasn't in the system anymore. I stood there at the counter for probably a full minute before I understood what had happened." Sylvia set down her spoon. "He removed you from his plan without telling me." Claire's jaw tightened. That was the moment I knew I had to get out. Not the accounts, not the car keys, the insurance, because that one he did quietly. No warning, no argument. He just erased it. Like I was a line item he'd decided to cut. I watched my daughter's face while she said this. The anger in it was new, not the frightened, desperate energy from the penthouse, but something steadier and colder underneath. Something that had been building for a while and had finally found enough oxygen to catch. "Claire," I said. "The voicemails you deleted, were those the only records you kept?" She looked up at me. Something shifted behind her eyes. "No," she said. She reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her phone. She set it on the table between us and slid it toward me without unlocking it. First, then seemed to change her mind, picked it back up, pressed her thumb to the screen, and opened a folder. She turned the phone to face me. The folder was labeled with a date 11 months ago. Inside it were photographs, screenshots, audio files. Dozens of them organized by month, each one labeled in Claire's neat, precise handwriting, threat. Feb 14, account change, notice, voicemail, transcript, photo of bruising left wrist. My chest did something I did not allow onto my face. I scrolled slowly. Text messages where Dominic laid out exactly what he would do if she left specific, detailed the language of a man who had rehearsed this. Screenshots of bank notifications showing transfers she had not authorized. A 2-minute audio recording, the sound quality slightly muffled, of Dominic explaining to someone on the phone that Claire's name was on certain accounts and that this was, as he put it, a useful arrangement. I looked up from the phone. You recorded that last one without him knowing, I said. I had my phone in my jacket pocket. Claire's chin lifted slightly. I didn't plan it. He got a call while we were in the car, and I didn't stop the recording app. But after I heard what he said, I started planning everything else. Virginia is a 2-party consent state, I said. A recording made without the other person's knowledge cannot be used as primary evidence in a state court. Claire's expression flickered, the first shadow of doubt crossing her face since she had opened the folder. But, I said, federal civil proceedings operate under different rules. And if this becomes a federal investigation, which it will, that recording becomes corroborating material. It points investigators toward the right accounts. It does not have to stand alone. I pushed the phone back toward her. It is still valuable, keep it. Claire exhaled slowly, the shadow passing. You know an uncomfortable amount about evidence law for someone who claims to do policy work. Boring meetings, I said. Very educational. How long have you been building this? 8 months. She held my gaze steadily. Every time he threatened me, I documented it. Every time something changed on an account, I screenshotted the notification. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of it. I just knew that someday I might need it, and I might only get one chance to use it. I set the phone down on the table carefully, the way you set down something that has just revealed itself to be considerably more valuable than it appeared. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had spent 8 months afraid and controlled and systematically stripped of every resource that gave her independence, who had somehow, in the middle of all of that, found the clarity to build a case. You are more like me than you know Claire, I said. She frowned slightly, the way she always did when she suspected I was saying something that meant more than the words. What does that mean? It means you did exactly the right thing. I pushed the phone back toward her. Don't let that out of your possession. Sylvia, who had been watching this exchange from across the table with the particular expression she wore when she was thinking several moves ahead, reached over and refilled Claire's water glass without comment. Then Claire's phone buzzed on the table face up so we all saw it. Unknown number. Claire's hand moved toward it instinctively. I picked it up first. I swiped to answer and held it to my ear and said nothing. 3 seconds of background noise, the low, ambient hum of a city interior, climate-controlled air, the faint sound of traffic 20 floors below. Then Dominic's voice came through, controlled and deliberate, and carrying the specific tone of a man who was certain of the effect his words were having. I know exactly where you are, old man, he said. I know the address, I know the county, I know the road. You have until 9 o'clock tonight to put her in her car, which I'll have delivered to you. I'm feeling generous, and send her back. After 9, I stop being generous. He paused, apparently for effect. The paperwork I file tomorrow morning will end her, he continued. And when I'm done with her, I'll start on you. That truck of yours is probably worth about $400. I hope you enjoy it because it'll be the last thing you own. The line stayed open. He was waiting for me to respond, to plead, to argue, to threaten back, to do anything that would confirm he had the upper hand. I pressed the red button. I set the phone face down on the table. Claire was staring at me, her face tight with fresh fear, her hands gripping the edge of the table hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. "Dad." "Eat your soup," I said. "It's getting cold." Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees at the edge of the property. I heard it come and go in a long, slow wave, and underneath it so faint that only someone listening specifically for it would catch it, the soft crunch of gravel settling at the far end of the driveway. Sylvia got Claire to bed by 8:30. I heard them upstairs, Claire's voice still going quieter now, the words blurring into tone rather than content, and Sylvia's responses low and steady, the sound of someone talking a person back from a ledge, one careful sentence at a time. Then the creak of the guest room door. Then quiet. I sat in the armchair by the front window with no lights on. The fire in the wood stove had burned down to coals that threw a dim orange pulse across the floorboards, enough to see by without illuminating anything. Outside, the moon was up, but thin, more suggestion than light. The pine trees at the property line were dark shapes against a slightly less dark sky. I had my eyes on the driveway, the anger that a normal father would have felt hours ago, the hot, immediate kind that demands action and noise had never arrived in me. What came instead was something quieter and considerably more dangerous. It settled into the base of my skull and behind my sternum, and it did not burn. It was cold, and it was very, very clear. I thought about the folder on Claire's phone, the photograph labeled bruising left wrist. I had seen that photograph for less than 2 seconds, and I would be able to describe every detail of it for the rest of my life. Then I thought about something else. I had spent 30 years in service to this country, doing things that required a specific quality of mind, the ability to remain functional when the stakes were personal, to keep the analytical machinery running when every instinct was screaming. I had done it in Kabul in 2003, pinned in a collapsed building with 2 colleagues for 11 hours, while the temperature outside hit 110 and the radio stayed silent. I had done it in 3 countries whose names I could not say in public. I had done it every single time. But I had not done it on a Tuesday afternoon when my daughter needed someone to pick up the phone. That thought sat in my chest like a piece of cold iron, and I let it sit there because I had learned a long time ago that the thoughts you try to push away are the ones that come back with reinforcements. Sylvia came down the stairs in the dark, moving quietly out of 35 years of practice at not waking people she didn't intend to wake. She did not turn on any lights. She crossed to the kitchen, and I heard the soft sound of the kettle being filled, the click of the burner catching. Then she came and sat on the arm of the sofa closest to my chair, and for a moment neither of us spoke, and the fire coals pulsed their slow orange rhythm. "She cried herself to sleep," Sylvia said. "She was out in about 4 minutes." "Good." She kept apologizing. Sylvia's voice was careful and precise. Every few minutes, she'd say she was sorry for not calling sooner. I kept telling her she had nothing to apologize for. She paused. "She has a lot to work through." "She does." "Eugene." Sylvia leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her eyes finding mine in the dim light. "I need to say something to you, and I need you to actually hear it, not just process it." "I'm listening." "You are not responsible for the 8 months she spent in that apartment," Sylvia said, her voice firm and clear, and carrying the particular authority of a woman who had spent her career saying difficult things to powerful people in rooms where no one wanted to hear them. "You could not have known. She hid it from us specifically, so we wouldn't know. That is what people in her situation do. They protect the people they love from the weight of it." My throat tightened in a way I did not try to control. She had a photograph on her phone, Sylvia. Her wrist. I know. I missed it. You came the moment she asked. Sylvia reached over and put her hand over mine where it rested on the arm of the chair, and she gripped it hard, not a gentle, comforting grip, but the firm, deliberate hold of someone who needs you to feel the contact. That is what matters, Eugene. You came. The kettle started its low whistle from the kitchen. Sylvia stood to get it, and then from outside, sudden and sharp, came the crack of breaking glass and the hard thud of something heavy hitting the living room floor. Sylvia spun toward the sound. I was already out of the chair. A rock the size of a fist sat on the floorboards, surrounded by broken glass from the front window. Wrapped around it with black electrical tape was a folded piece of paper. I crossed to it in 4 steps, crouched down and peeled the tape away. Unfolded the paper under the faint glow of the coal fire. 6 words in thick black marker. Send her back or the house burns. I read it once. Then I turned it over, checking for anything on the reverse side, and found it. A second sheet folded separately tucked inside the first. A photograph printed in color on standard copy paper. Claire asleep in the guest room upstairs. Shot through the window from outside. Close enough that I could see the crease in the pillow beside her face. My hand did not shake. But somewhere deep in my chest, behind the cold iron and the clear, analytical calm, something shifted, something old and very still that had been waiting a long time to be needed again. I folded both pieces of paper, put them in my shirt pocket. Then I went to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, and found the key I had not touched in 6 years. The key was cold in my hand. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, listening to the house. Upstairs, nothing. Claire was down hard the way people sleep when their body finally overrules their mind. Sylvia had come back into the kitchen behind me and was standing very still by the counter. Her arms crossed, watching me with the expression she wore when she had already thought 3 steps past the current moment and was waiting for me to catch up. "The window," she said. "I'll board it in the morning." I looked at the key. "Go back upstairs, Sylvia." "Eugene, I need you up there in case Claire wakes up." I met her eyes. "Please." She held my gaze for 4 full seconds. Then she unfolded her arms, walked me, and put both hands flat on my chest, not pushing, just resting there, feeling my heartbeat. The way she had done since 1979 when she wanted to know what I was actually feeling versus what I was telling her I was feeling. Whatever she found, she nodded once. "Don't be out there all night," she said. "I won't." She went upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door. Then I pulled on my jacket, picked up the key, and went out the back. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s. My breath came out in pale clouds that the thin moonlight caught and dissolved. The grass was wet and stiff with the first suggestion of a frost that would arrive properly within the week, and my boots made a soft, crushing sound. With each step that I regulated carefully, heel, first, weight, distributed the old unconscious discipline of moving across unknown ground at night. The barn was 40 yards from the back door. I had built it myself in 1998 with help from a neighbor who was under the impression I was a retired federal bureaucrat with too much time on his hands. The neighbor had been a fine carpenter and had never asked questions I didn't want to answer, which made him one of my favorite people in the county. The padlock opened on the first try, despite 6 years of disuse. The door swung inward with a low creak that I made a mental note to oil in the morning. Inside smelled the way barns smell old wood dust, the ghost of diesel from a tractor I had sold in 2019. My flashlight found the workbench along the far wall, the one I had built with a surface 3 inches thicker than any workbench needed to be. I braced my shoulder against the right end and pushed. The bench rolled on the concealed casters I had installed in the floor joists, grinding slightly with disuse until the section of flooring behind it was exposed. The safe was flush-mounted, the dial face level with the surrounding concrete. I crouched down, feeling the protest in my right knee, and worked the combination from memory: right 4 turns to the first number, left 3 to the second, right 2 to the third. 31 years since I had set this combination, and I had never written it down, and I had never forgotten it. The door swung open. The tactical vest was on the left, folded exactly as I had left it. Beside it, the satellite phone in its case. Beside that, 4 matte black boxes roughly the size of a deck of cards. Each the camera unit's military specification, capable of capturing clear footage in complete darkness, at ranges up to 200 feet. And on the right side of the safe, resting on a square of black velvet that Sylvia had cut from an old evening gown sometime in the 1990s, as a joke that had become something else entirely: the badge. Not a badge I could currently use in any official capacity. My authority had ended with my retirement. But it was the physical record of what I had been, and I had kept it the way some men keep their military dog tags, not because it granted anything, but because there were nights when you needed a reminder of exactly what you were capable of. I picked it up, held it for a moment, set it back down. I took the vest and the cameras and closed the safe. The next 3 hours, I moved around the perimeter of the property in a pattern I had last executed in a professional context in 2015 outside a safe house in a country I still could not name publicly. The cameras went into the hollows of the 2 large oaks flanking the driveway, into the dense cedar brush at the northeast corner of the property, onto the eave of the barn itself facing the road, and into a fork in the pine tree nearest the main gate, where the angle covered both the gate approach and the gravel turnaround. Each unit took 11 minutes to position correctly. I did not rush any of them. While I worked, I thought about the photograph of Claire sleeping. Someone had stood outside that window, had aimed a camera through the glass at my daughter lying unconscious in her bed, had printed the image and driven out here in the dark to leave it wrapped around a rock. Every part of that sequence was a deliberate message: not just "I know where you are," but "I can reach her wherever she is, and there is nothing you can do about it." Dominic Voss had sent that message to frighten me into compliance. What he had actually done was remove the last constraint I had been operating under. I finished with the final camera as the eastern sky began its first gray suggestion of dawn. I stood at the edge of the property in the tree line and looked back at the house, every angle of approach now covered, every blind spot eliminated. The feeds were routing to an encrypted receiver I had placed in the kitchen junk drawer alongside the receiver for the baby monitor we had bought when Claire was born and never thrown away. Dominic thought he was hunting a frightened family in a farmhouse. He had just walked into a perimeter that had been used to track people considerably more dangerous than him. I pulled my jacket tighter against the cold and walked back toward the house. The back door opened before I reached it. Sylvia was standing in the doorway in her robe, holding a mug in each hand, backlit by the kitchen light. 4 hours, she said, holding one mug out to me. 3.5. I took it. The coffee was black and very hot, and I wrapped both hands around it and let the warmth move up through my palms. She looked at me, at the vest I was still wearing, at whatever was in my face, and she did not ask what I had done out there. She stepped back to let me in, and as I passed her, she put her hand briefly on my arm just above the elbow, the way she had done on the morning of every departure for 30 years. I was home. She knew what I had just become again. And we went inside. Dawn came in gray and cold through the kitchen windows. I had been sitting at the table for 20 minutes, still in the tactical vest, both hands around my second cup of coffee, when I heard the floorboards on the stairs creak in the specific pattern that meant Claire Her right foot always landed heavier than her left. A habit she had developed as a teenager and never lost. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in borrowed sweatpants and one of my old flannel shirts, her hair still loose from sleep, her eyes swollen but less raw than the night before. She looked at the tactical vest on my chest, and her face did something complicated. "Dad." She crossed to the coffee maker, poured a mug, and turned to face me. "What is that? Old work equipment. It looks like body armor." "It's a vest. Sit down, sweetheart." She sat down across from me, both hands around her mug, and she looked at me the way she had looked at that bicycle when she was 7, with the focused attention of someone who has realized they do not fully understand the thing in front of them. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to actually answer me. Not the government analyst version, the real answer." I set my coffee down. "All right. Last night." Her voice was steady, but I could see what it was costing her. "The man who threw that rock went to his car and drove away. But you were not scared. Not even a little. I watched you pick up that note, and I watched your face, and there was nothing there. Not fear, not surprise, not even anger. You looked like someone checking their mail." She pressed her lips together. "Who are you?" I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table in the gray October morning light. I thought about 30 years of careful, deliberate omission. The cover stories layered so deep they had become reflexive. The way I had constructed an entire version of myself for Claire, to love a version that was real, that was genuinely me, but that was also incomplete in a way I had always told myself was necessary. I thought about the photograph in my shirt pocket. "I worked for the CIA," I said, "for 30 years. I retired as director." The kitchen was very quiet. Claire's hands tightened around her mug. She did not speak for a moment, and I watched her process it, the airports, the exhaustion that was different from other fathers' exhaustion, the way I had always known things I should not have known and never explained how. "Director," she repeated. "Yes." "Of the Central Intelligence Agency." "Yes." She exhaled a long, controlled breath that told me she was keeping herself together through sheer determination. "For how long did Mom know?" "Your mother knew from the beginning. It was a condition I set before we married. No secrets between us about what I did. She could know everything or I would find a different life." I paused. She chose to know. Claire looked down at her coffee. A tear dropped into it, just one, and she blinked hard and did not let another follow. "And you didn't tell me because the safest version of you was the version that didn't know," I said. "If no one connected to me knew what I was, no one could use them to get to me." That was the logic. It was correct logic. My throat tightened. It was also a choice I am not entirely at peace with. She looked up. Her eyes were bright and wet, but her voice, when it came, was clear. "Is that why you came so fast? 2 words, and you just dropped everything. 3 words." She stared at me. Then a sound came out of her that was half laugh and half sob, and she pressed the back of her hand hard against her mouth to contain it, and her shoulders shook once before she pulled them straight again. 3 words, she repeated. "Dad, please. Now." She shook her head slowly. "I almost didn't send it. I almost told myself I was being dramatic and that I could handle it. I know." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "I am very glad you sent it." She turned her hand over and gripped mine hard, the way she had gripped it on the elevator, the way she had gripped it at 7 on the driveway gravel. And for a moment, we just sat like that in the cold morning light, while the coffee steamed between us. Then my satellite phone buzzed in the vest pocket. I knew before I looked at the screen who it was. I had given Arthur Bellamy this number in 2019 and told him to use it only if the matter could not wait. I looked at Claire. "I have to take this." She let go of my hand, nodded, reached for her coffee. I stepped into the hallway, pressed answer, and Arthur's voice came through low and fast and carrying the specific urgency of a man who had been up since before dawn. "Eugene," he said, "we need to talk about Dominic Voss. I've been sitting on something for 2 months, and I think you need to hear it right now." Arthur was still talking when the knock hit the front door. 3 sharp raps, the kind that came from someone who had been trained to announce authority through the specific weight of a closed fist on wood. I knew that knock. I had heard it on 100 doors in 100 jurisdictions, and it always meant the same thing: official business, whether you were ready for it or not. "Hold on," I told Arthur. I stepped back into the kitchen. Claire was on her feet already, her coffee mug set down hard on the counter, her eyes wide and fixed on the front hallway. Sylvia appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, her robe pulled tight. "Stay here," I said to Claire. I walked to the front door and opened it. The deputy was young, mid-20s, county sheriff's department, the kind of uncomfortable that showed in the way he was distributing his weight between his feet. He had a stack of manila folders under his arm, thick enough that the rubber band holding them together had cut a visible groove in the paper. "I'm looking for Claire Harlan," he said. "She's inside." "I need to serve her directly, sir." I stepped back, called Claire's name. She came to the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, and when the deputy saw her, he had the decency to look genuinely sorry about what he was doing. He held out the stack of folders. "Miss Harlan, you've been served." Claire took them with both hands. The deputy was already turning back toward his cruiser before the folders had fully transferred. He did not look back. Claire stood in the hallway holding the stack against her chest, staring at the closed door like it might open again and take the papers back. Then she carried them to the kitchen table and set them down and opened the top folder and started reading. I watched her face change. It happened in stages: confusion first, then understanding, then something that drained the color out of her completely. She got through 2 pages before her breathing went shallow and rapid, and she pushed the folders away from her like they had burned her hands. "Dad." Her voice came out in pieces. "He's suing me. He's saying I embezzled $2.3 million from his company's charitable foundation." She pressed both hands flat on the table to steady herself. "There are bank statements in there with my name on accounts I have never seen in my life. There are ledger entries. Dad, they look real. They look completely real." I picked up the top folder and read. The complaint was thorough, in the way that only expensive legal work is thorough: every fabricated detail buttressed by another fabricated detail, each one plausible enough on its own that the cumulative effect was genuinely convincing. The bank statements showed transfers from the foundation's operating account into a personal account bearing Claire's name and social security number. The ledger entries showed a pattern of withdrawals over 14 months. The whole construction was elegant and merciless. At the bottom of the signature page, Judge Harold Mercer, Superior Court, certified and stamped. "He has a judge," Claire said, her voice rising. I told you last night he has Judge Mercer, and now Mercer's name is on these papers, and I don't have $2.3 million. I don't have $2.3 thousand. I have nothing, and he's going to—" "Claire." I set the folder down. "Look at me." She looked at me. Her chin was shaking. Her eyes were filling fast, and she was fighting it with everything she had. "He is not going to win this," I said. Not because I am telling you what you want to hear, because what he has just done, filing fabricated financial documents with a court using a judge he has paid to certify them, is not a local civil matter. What he has just done is commit federal crimes and hand us the documentation. She stared at me. Dad, he has a judge. He has a local judge, I said. A local judge who just put his name on evidence of his own corruption. Dominic Voss thinks he is fighting a local battle with local weapons. He has no idea he just stepped into federal jurisdiction. I picked up all 3 folders and tucked them under my arm. I need to make a phone call. Don't touch anything in those folders. Don't respond to anything. Don't let anyone in this house. I was halfway down the hallway when my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. I told you I would ruin her old man. Send her back right now, and every single one of those charges disappears. Keep playing games, and she spends the next 10 years in a federal cell. Your move. I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my pocket and kept walking. Behind me, I heard Claire say something to Sylvia in a voice that was trying very hard not to fall apart. Sylvia's response was low and immediate, and I did not catch the words, but I knew the tone, the same tone she had used in situation rooms and briefing halls, and on every occasion when someone needed to be pulled back from the edge of panic by someone who had seen worse and kept their head. I went into the study, closed the door, and picked up the satellite phone. Arthur answered before the second ring. I just had a county deputy serve my daughter with a fabricated embezzlement complaint, I said. $2.3 million. Judge Harold Mercer's signature. A pause. Then Arthur said very quietly, Eugene, I need you to listen to me carefully because what I'm about to tell you changes the shape of everything. Talk, I said. I heard Arthur move the sound of a door closing the shift in acoustic that meant he had just stepped away from other people. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to the register he used when something was genuinely serious. 2 months ago, Arthur said, you called me to say Claire was seeing someone named Dominic Voss. You were not asking me to look into him. You just mentioned it the way you mention things when you want someone to know without having to ask directly. I remember. I looked into him anyway. A pause. Because I know you, and because men who date the daughters of former CIA directors without knowing it are either very unlucky or very stupid, and Dominic Voss did not strike me as stupid. I sat down in the leather chair behind the desk. What did you find? On the surface, a successful mid-level real estate developer. Georgetown office, 3 luxury residential projects in D.C. and Northern Virginia, clean credit, no criminal record. Arthur's voice was precise and methodical, the way it got when he was working through a brief. Below the surface, a different picture entirely. His domestic revenue does not support his lifestyle or his overhead. His 3 residential projects have sold a combined total of 11 units in 2 years. The man is functionally bankrupt by any legitimate measure. Then where is the money coming from? That is exactly the right question. I could hear him pulling something up on a screen. His corporate accounts show regular capital infusions registered as foreign investment anonymous offshore sources routed through holding companies in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. The amounts are structured, carefully broken into increments just below federal reporting thresholds to avoid automatic flagging. But the volume, Eugene, we are talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars moving through his company over 4 years. The room was very quiet. He is laundering money, I said. On a substantial scale, Arthur confirmed. I could not identify the source with the tools available to me, which is why I did not call you sooner. I needed more before I brought you something incomplete. He paused. The fabricated lawsuit changes that. When Dominic filed that complaint with Judge Mercer's signature, He made two catastrophic errors. The first being that he put fraudulent documents into a court record, I said. Which is perjury and fraud on a federal level, yes. Submitting fabricated financial ledgers to a court is not a local offense regardless of which judge signs it. The moment those documents entered the court system, they became evidence of his crimes, not Claire's. Arthur's voice carried something I recognized as controlled anger. His second error was Judge Mercer. I have been aware of Mercer for 14 months, Eugene. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit has had an open investigation on him for over a year, payments from multiple developers in exchange for favorable rulings. They have been waiting for a clean hook to close the case. A beat. Dominic Voss just handed them one. Mercer's signature on a fraudulent complaint connected to Voss's financial network is the exact link they needed. I pressed two fingers against my mouth and thought for a moment. The lawsuit is theater, I said. It was designed to terrify Claire into compliance. He did not think past the immediate effect. Correct. He is not thinking strategically. He is thinking like a man who is used to local intimidation working and cannot understand why it isn't working. Arthur cleared his throat. There is a third thing, Eugene. This one is worse. Tell me. Claire's name appears on 3 limited liability companies registered by Dominic over the past 8 months. The registrations were filed with notarized signatures, her signatures allegedly. I had a handwriting analyst look at copies this morning. His voice was flat and deliberate. They are forgeries. Competent ones, but forgeries. My hand tightened on the phone. These LLCs, I said carefully. What are they connected to? The same offshore capital network. They appear to be designed as a secondary layer, additional distance between Dominic and the money source. Arthur let that sit for a moment. If his operation collapses, Claire's forged name on those registrations makes her the most visible domestic actor in the paperwork. She would be the first person any investigator found. She was not his girlfriend, Eugene. His voice was very quiet now. She was his contingency plan. Something moved through me that was not anger. Anger was too small a word for it. It was the cold, absolute clarity that comes when you understand completely what you are dealing with and exactly what it requires. Arthur, I said, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Pull everything you have on Voss's corporate structure. Every filing, every subsidiary, every registered agent. Cross-reference it with the LLC registrations bearing Claire's name. Build me a complete picture of how the money moves and where it goes. I paused. And I need a forensic contact, someone who can trace offshore routing numbers through FinCEN without triggering a formal investigation flag. Not yet. I have someone, Arthur said immediately. Ray Costello, former NSA, now consults for Treasury. He is the best wire tracer I have ever seen, and he owes me considerably more than a favor. Get him on the phone, I said. Tell him I'll call in 20 minutes. Eugene. Arthur's voice shifted slightly, not concern exactly, but the careful tone of a man making sure he was understood. Whatever you are planning, be aware that if Dominic is holding assets for the kind of organization I think he is holding them for, he is not operating independently. There are people above him who will not want this exposed. I know, I said. Those people have resources. So do I said. They just do not know that yet. I ended the call. Sat for a moment in the quiet of the study. Then I picked up the satellite phone again and dialed the number Arthur had just sent me. It rang twice. A voice answered, slightly graveled, carrying the specific flattened affect of someone who spent their career listening to other people's conversations and had lost the habit of inflection. "Costello," the voice said. "Ray," I said. "My name is Eugene Harlan. Arthur Bellamy says you can find money that doesn't want to be found." A pause. Then, "Harlan." Another pause longer. "Eugene Harlan. The Eugene Harlan. However many of us there are," I said. "I need you to look at some numbers for me. Before I go any further, type, 'Follow the money below' if you are still here." Because what Ray found on the other end of those wire transfers did not just expose Dominic Voss. It exposed everything. Parts of this story include fictional elements added for educational purposes. You are always free to choose what you spend your time on. Ray Costello did not make small talk. That was the first thing I remembered about him from the 3 times our work had overlapped during my last decade at the agency. He answered questions directly. He asked questions directly, and he treated every second of conversation that did not advance the objective as a personal insult. It was a quality I had always found refreshing. "Oh, give me the name of the primary corporate entity, Tsuno," he said, and I could already hear him typing before I finished saying Dominic's company name. "And the registered state. Delaware Incorporation, DC Operations. Standard." More typing. "Give me 20 minutes. He did not say goodbye. The line went quiet, but did not disconnect. He kept it open the way field operatives do when they want both parties available the moment something surfaces. I sat in the leather chair and listened to the faint sound of keystrokes, and once Ray muttering something under his breath that I could not make out. 11 minutes later, he came back. "All right," he said, and his voice had changed. The flat professional affect had acquired an edge underneath it, the kind that develops when you find something genuinely unexpected. His domestic revenue picture is exactly what Arthur described. Functionally insolvent. 3 residential projects, minimal legitimate sales overhead that should have killed the company 18 months ago. A pause filled with more typing. But his corporate accounts show consistent positive balances. Large ones. Which means the money is coming from somewhere that does not appear in his standard filings. "The offshore accounts," I said. "I am looking at them right now through FinCEN's international wire monitoring system." Ray's voice dropped slightly, the instinctive lowering that happens when someone is reading something serious. "Eugene, these are not passive investment accounts. These are active transfer nodes. The money moves in from source accounts in the Cayman Islands, passes through a Luxembourg intermediary, gets broken into increments between $8,000 and $9,000 each, just below the $10,000 threshold that triggers automatic currency transaction reports under the Bank Secrecy Act, and lands in Dominic's operating accounts, registered as anonymous foreign development capital. How much total? Over 4 years." A pause. $340 million. The study was very quiet. "He is running a full commercial laundering operation," I said. "A sophisticated one," Ray confirmed. "The structuring alone, breaking deposits below CTR thresholds to avoid federal flags, that is a federal felony under 31 U.S.C. 5324, completely independent of the underlying fraud. But Eugene, that is not the part that concerns me most." His typing stopped entirely. I ran the routing numbers on the source accounts. The originating nodes in the Cayman Islands trace back to a financial network the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and Interpol have been mapping for 5 years. It operates across 11 countries. The Bureau has been trying to identify the domestic contact point for this network for 3 years. I pressed 2 fingers against my temple. "Dominic Voss is their domestic laundry," I said. He is a glorified middleman, Ray said, and there was a cold precision in his voice now. He does not own this operation. He holds the keys for people who are considerably more dangerous than a Georgetown real estate developer, which means when his operation starts to come apart, he becomes a liability to them, and men who run 11-country financial networks do not manage liabilities gently. He panicked when Claire left, I said, thinking out loud, because her name was already on those LLC registrations. If she was gone and talking to people, the entire domestic structure was exposed. She was not a girlfriend he was trying to control, Ray said flatly. She was a firewall he was trying to maintain. I thought about my daughter sitting at the kitchen table with her hands shaking around a coffee mug. I thought about the photograph in my shirt pocket. Well, Ray, I said. Judge Harold Mercer. His name is on the complaint Dominic filed this morning. A beat. Then Ray made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Mercer. Eugene, the FBI's public corruption, has had an active case on Mercer for 14 months. They have been unable to close it because every payment they could identify was structured just ambiguously enough to argue as legitimate. A campaign contribution here, a consulting arrangement there. His typing resumed faster now. I am looking at Mercer's financial disclosures against Dominic's subsidiary filings. There is an LLC registered to Dominic's network that shows payments to a holding company traceable to Mercer $180,000 over 18 months, registered as legal consulting fees. Hanemanandi sium. Documented, I said, completely. And now that same judge's signature is on a fraudulent court filing connected to the same financial network. Ray's voice was very deliberate. Dominic did not just bribe a judge. He documented the bribery and then used the judge in a way that will force investigators to examine the entire relationship. He handed the Public Corruption Unit exactly what they needed to close their case and open 3 new ones. I stood up from the chair and walked to the window. The October morning outside was sharp and cold, the tree line throwing long shadows across the frost-stiffened grass. Ray, I said, do not flag any of this officially, not yet. I figured, he said. You want to control the sequence. I want to make sure Claire's name is completely clear before any formal action begins. The LLC registrations with her forged signature need to be addressed before investigators start pulling threads. Arthur can handle the forgery documentation, Ray said. Get him the originals and a clean chain of custody, and he can have a federal judge issue an order vacating her name from those registrations before any criminal referral is filed. A pause. Eugene, one more thing. Say it. Dominic is going to figure out that something is wrong. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but when his usual pressure tactics stop producing results, and he cannot reach the people above him for reassurance, he is going to get desperate. Ray's voice was measured and serious. Desperate men in his position make one of 2 choices. They either run or they escalate. Given that he has already thrown a rock through your window, I do not think he is the running type. No, I said. He is not. Watch your perimeter tonight. Already done, I said. Thank you, Ray. Don't thank me, he said. Just make sure the right people end up in the right rooms. The line clicked off. I stood at the window for a long moment looking at the tree line. Somewhere out there, the cameras I had placed before dawn were recording every angle of approach in crisp, silent detail, waiting for the moment Dominic Voss made his next move. He thought he was the predator in this situation. He had been wrong about that from the moment he let those elevator doors open. Arthur called back at 2:17 in the afternoon. I was at the kitchen table with a legal pad working through the sequence of events in the order they would need to be presented to a federal prosecutor. Not because I expected to do that work myself, but because 30 years of intelligence work had taught me that the person who controls the narrative controls the outcome, and I intended to control this one completely. Claire had spent the morning between the kitchen and the living room couch, moving the way people move when their nervous system has been running at emergency capacity for too long and does not know how to downshift. She had eaten half a piece of toast at 10 o'clock. She had called her school to arrange a substitute for the rest of the week. She had asked me twice whether she needed a lawyer, and I had told her both times that Arthur was handling it, and both times she had nodded and gone back to staring at something that was not quite in the room. Sylvia had stayed close to her all morning, which meant Sylvia had been doing the thing she was exceptionally good at, being a steady, calm, physically present human being in the vicinity of someone who needed that more than they needed advice or information. It was a skill that looked simple and was not. "The corporate picture is complete," Arthur said when I answered, "and it is considerably worse than what I had 2 months ago." "Tell me." His 3 residential projects are essentially empty shells. The buildings exist, the units exist, but the sales are fictitious transactions between connected entities designed to create the appearance of legitimate revenue. When my team cross-referenced the buyer names against public records, more than 60% of them trace back to the same network of LLCs that Ray identified in the wire analysis. Arthur's voice was tight and precise. "The entire operation is a closed loop. Money comes in from overseas, gets cycled through fake property sales, and comes out the other side registered as clean domestic real estate revenue. Eugene, a federal prosecutor with this file, does not need to build a case. The case is already built. Dominic built it himself." "What is his actual net exposure if this unravels?" I asked. "Criminal wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343, money laundering under 18 U.S.C. 1956, conspiracy structuring. We are talking about mandatory minimums that stack. A federal prosecutor with this file could put him away for 20 years without breaking a sweat." A pause. "Civil, the 3 residential projects alone represent hundreds of millions in fraudulent transactions. The government would seize every asset he has ever touched." I wrote 2 lines on the legal pad and underlined them both. "The LLC registrations with Claire's name," I said. "How clean is the forgery documentation?" "My handwriting analyst has a signed affidavit ready. I also have a forensic accountant who can demonstrate that the LLCs show no financial activity connected to Claire in any form. No deposits, no withdrawals, no correspondence, nothing. Her name was placed on those registrations purely as a liability buffer." Arthur's voice hardened. "Eugene, what Dominic did to Claire constitutes identity fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1028. That alone carries up to 15 years. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a separate alert, one of the perimeter cameras. I pulled up the MVAID on the encrypted receiver I had moved to the kitchen counter that morning. The camera covering the road approach showed a black sedan moving slowly past the property. Not stopping. Just moving slowly the way a vehicle moves when the driver is looking at something specific. It passed. Did not return. "Arthur," I said. "He is running surveillance on the property." "I know," Arthur said. "Which brings me to the other thing. I have a contact inside a private investigations firm that Dominic uses for sensitive work. He reached out to them this morning, requesting a full background investigation on you name employment history, current associations." A beat. "They called me 40 minutes ago." I set the pen down. "They called you. They recognized your name from a file that apparently circulated in certain professional communities some years ago." Arthur's voice carried something that sounded almost like satisfaction. They told Dominic's office they were returning his retainer in full and could not assist with the request. They did not explain why. I thought about what Ray had said about desperate men making one of two choices. Dominic had just learned that a professional investigation firm, people who made their living knowing things, had looked at his request and walked away from the money. That was information. Information that would sit in his chest like a splinter and work its way deeper with every hour he did not understand what it meant. "He is frightened," I said. "He should be," Arthur said. But frightened men with criminal exposure and no exit strategy do not become cooperative. They become dangerous. His voice was very direct. "What is your timeline, Eugene?" "I need one more piece," I said. "Ray is monitoring his communications through Fiancé. When Dominic gets scared enough to reach up the chain to contact whoever is actually running the network he works for, that communication becomes evidence of the conspiracy. It closes the case from the top down instead of the bottom up. And then we hand everything to the right people and let the system do what it is designed to do." I looked at the legal pad. "I want Claire's name vacated from those LLC registrations before any formal action is filed. That is not negotiable. I can have a motion filed with a federal judge by end of business tomorrow," Arthur said. "With the forgery affidavit and the forensic accounting, it will not be contested." "Don't do it," I said. "And Arthur, the DOJ contact you have in the public integrity section, the one who has been building the Mercer case." "Yes. I want to have something in his hands by tomorrow morning. Not everything. Just enough to make sure that when this moves, it moves in the right direction." "I'll prepare a summary tonight," Arthur said. "Eugene." He paused. "You know that when this breaks, it is going to make noise." "I know." "Your name will stay out of it." "My name was never in it," I said. "That is the whole point." I ended the call, looked at the 2 underlined lines on the legal pad. Then I looked up at the kitchen doorway where Claire was standing, a fresh cup of coffee in both hands, watching me with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression she had worn at 7 years old, when she realized the training wheels were off and her father's hand was no longer on the back of the seat. Uncertain, but not stopping. "Is it working?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded once, a small, tight nod, and went back to the living room. Outside, the afternoon light was going golden through the pine trees, and somewhere at the end of the driveway, I knew Dominic Voss was making a decision he did not yet understand, would be the last one he made as a free man. The sun went down fast, the way it does in October in Virginia. One minute, the tree line was lit gold, and the next minute everything was just dark and cold and the stars were out. Claire had gone up to bed at 8, moving slowly up the stairs, with one hand trailing the banister, the exhaustion of 2 days of sustained fear finally pulling her under completely. She had hugged me at the bottom of the stairs, not the quick, habitual hug of a regular evening, but the kind that lasts several seconds longer than usual, and says something that neither person is quite ready to put into words. I held on until she let go first. Sylvia came out to the porch at 8:45, with 2 mugs of tea, moving through the dark without needing a light. She had done everything in this house in the dark for 25 years, knew every floorboard, every step, every inch of the way between any 2 rooms. She handed me a mug and sat down in the chair beside mine without preamble. We sat for a while without talking. The woods were making their October sounds, the dry rattle of leaves not quite ready to fall, something moving in the brush at the tree line, the long, low settle of the pine branches in a wind that was just starting to carry real cold in it. "She looked better going up than she did coming down this morning," Sylvia said finally. She ate dinner, I said. That is progress. She asked me while you were on the phone this afternoon whether you were scared. Sylvia wrapped both hands around her mug. I told her I had not seen you scared since 1987, and I was not entirely sure you still remembered how. What did she say? She said that was either very reassuring or very alarming, and she had not decided which. Sylvia looked sideways at me. I told her both could be true at the same time. I almost smiled. Almost. Sylvia set her mug down on the porch railing and turned to face me more directly, and I recognized the shift, the way her whole body oriented, when she was about to say something that she had been carrying and was ready to put down. Eugene, she said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it the way you hear things when you are not in operational mode, not as information to be assessed and filed, but as something I am telling you because you deserve to know it. All right? 4 months ago, she said, a former colleague of mine at the NSC reached out. He had come across Dominic Voss's name in a financial monitoring report flagged as a person of interest in connection with some offshore accounts they were tracking. Nothing actionable yet. Just a flag. She held my gaze steadily. He called me because he knew Claire was seeing someone by that name, and he thought I should be aware. The porch was very quiet. You knew, I said. I knew there was something wrong with him, Sylvia said, and her voice was clear and direct the way it always was when she was being precise about something important. I did not know the full extent of it, and I did not tell you because... She stopped, started again. I did not tell Claire because she needed to make her own decision about her own life. She is 32 years old, and I was not going to take that from her based on a flag in a report that might have led nowhere. And you did not tell me, I said carefully, because you knew what I would do. Sylvia did not look away. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. The wind moved through the pines, and the cold in it had teeth now, the kind that found the gaps in your collar. You were protecting her right to choose, I said. I was protecting her right to choose, Sylvia agreed. And I was wrong. I have been sitting with that since yesterday morning, and I am not going to make it smaller than it is. Her voice tightened for just a moment, the only visible crack in a surface that had been solid for 2 days. I should have told her what I knew. Not everything, but enough. I thought I was giving her room. I was giving him time. I put my hand over hers on the arm of the chair. She turned her hand over and gripped mine hard the way she always gripped when the grip meant something. Sylvia, I said. She got out. She called. We are here. I know. Her jaw was set. That does not mean I was right. No, I agreed. It does not. We sat like that for a while, her hand in mine, the cold settling deeper around the porch. There is something else, Sylvia said. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan with her free hand and pulled out a folder, thick edges worn from handling. She set it on the arm of my chair. I have been building this for 4 months, cross-referenced with everything the NSC contact shared with me and everything I could pull from public filings on my own. She looked at it, then at me. I think it is time you read it. I picked it up. Even in the dim light from the window, I could see the tabs she had organized it into corporate structure. Financial patterns, judicial connections, timeline. 3 inches thick. 4 months of quiet, patient, methodical work. Sylvia, I said. Read it tonight, she said. There are things in there that Arthur and Ray will not have found yet. She stood up, picked up her mug. And tomorrow morning I am going to pay Dominic Voss a visit. I looked up at her. That is not a good idea. She looked back at me with the expression she had worn in every difficult room she had ever occupied. The expression of a woman who had spent her career being told what was and was not a good idea by people who subsequently discovered they had underestimated her. He asked for a meeting, she said. His lawyer called this afternoon while you were on the phone with Arthur. He wants to negotiate. He thinks you are coming. She set her mug on the railing. He is not going to be ready for me. She went inside. I sat on the dark porch with the folder in my lap and the cold settling hard around me, and I opened to the first tab and I started to read. Sylvia left at 9:15 the next morning in her dark navy coat, her hair pinned back, carrying the leather briefcase she had used every working day of her career and had never once replaced because she saw no reason to fix something that functioned exactly as intended. I watched her back the car out of the driveway from the kitchen window. Claire came to stand beside me, coffee in hand, and watched too. Should we be worried about her? She asked. No, I said. She looked like she was going to a board meeting. She looks like that when she is going to war, I said. It is the same expression. Claire turned to look at me. You are both extremely alarming people, she said with something in her voice that was not quite humor, but was in the same neighborhood and was the most normal sound she had made in 2 days. I took that as a good sign. Arthur called at 9:40 to confirm Sylvia had arrived at the building and cleared security. He had a contact at the desk retired bureau working private security who had let him know the moment she walked through the lobby. She is on her way up, Arthur said. Eugene, for what it is worth. I have seen a lot of capable people walk into difficult rooms. She walks differently. I know, I said. Do you want me to stay on the line? No. Give her room. I hung up and pulled up the camera feed from the property perimeter on the encrypted receiver, checked all 4 angles, driveway, clear road, clear tree line, clear, and then poured a second cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table to wait. What Arthur told me afterward confirmed by his contact inside the building and by the recording Sylvia had made on the small device she carried in the breast pocket of her coat. A habit from 30 years of meetings where the other party later claimed to remember things differently went like this. Dominic Voss received Sylvia in his office on the 35th floor. This is Arthur's account, filled in by the recording Sylvia carried in her coat pocket. He met her with the particular brand of condescension he reserved for people he had already decided were not threats. He offered her a seat across from his desk. He did not come around from behind it. Mrs. Harlan, he said, I expected your husband. My husband, Sylvia said, settling into the chair and setting the briefcase on her knees. Decided his time was better spent elsewhere. I hope that is not inconvenient. Dominic studied her for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, in the way men lean back when they are performing ease they do not entirely feel. I asked for this meeting because I think we can resolve this situation in a way that works for everyone. Claire is a wonderful woman. I want her to be safe and provided for. But she made some decisions regarding company funds that created a legal exposure for both of us, and I think, Mr. Voss, Sylvia said. She opened the briefcase and removed a single folder which she placed on his desk and opened to the first page. Judge Harold Mercer received $180,000 from an LLC connected to your corporate network over 18 months, documented as legal consulting fees. She turned to the next page. Your domestic company has not sold a legitimate residential unit in over 2 years. Your operating accounts are sustained entirely by wire transfers from offshore entities routed through the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. Next page. Claire's name appears on 3 LLC registrations bearing forged signatures. A forensic handwriting analyst has provided a signed affidavit confirming the forgeries. A federal judge will be asked to vacate those registrations by end of business today. Dominic's easy posture had gone very still. I don't know what you think you have, he started. I have everything, Sylvia said, and her voice did not rise or harden. It stayed exactly level, which was considerably more frightening than either alternative. The fabricated complaint you filed this morning constitutes perjury and fraud on a federal level. The judicial relationship you used to certify it is being reviewed by the FBI's Public Integrity Section as of this morning. The financial network your company services has been under international monitoring for 5 years. She closed the folder but did not pick it up. What you do not appear to understand, Mr. Voss, is that you have not been threatening a frightened woman and her elderly father. You have been threatening my family. Dominic stared at her across the desk. His face had gone through several things in quick succession surprise calculation, and now something that was working very hard to look like composure and not quite making it. Who are you? He said. I served as National Security Advisor for 11 years, Sylvia said, standing and picking up her briefcase. I advised 3 presidents. I have sat in rooms considerably more difficult than this one with people considerably more dangerous than you. She looked at him directly, without hostility, without drama, with the clear, steady certainty of someone who has already seen how this ends. I am leaving this folder with you so that you understand precisely what is coming. I would encourage you to speak with your attorney today. Not the one Mercer recommended, a different one. She walked to the door. Mrs. Harlan. Dominic's voice had changed. The authority had gone out of it entirely, leaving something underneath that was rawer and more honest. What does your husband want? Sylvia paused at the door, looked back at him over her shoulder. He wants you to make one more phone call, she said. You will know which one when you are frightened enough to make it. She walked out. Ray Costello called at 12:47 in the afternoon. I was at the kitchen table with the folder Sylvia had built over 4 months, spread open in front of me, cross-referencing her notes against the timeline Arthur had sent through the satellite phone's secure message function overnight. Sylvia had been back from Georgetown since 11, had eaten lunch standing at the counter, and had told me what happened in Dominic's office. In the flat, methodical way, she recounted things that had gone exactly as she intended. Claire had listened from the kitchen doorway with both arms wrapped around herself and her eyes getting wider with every sentence. And when Sylvia finished, Claire had looked at her mother for a long moment and said, I genuinely had no idea what kind of people you are. And Sylvia had said, good. That was the point. When the satellite phone buzzed, I picked it up before the second vibration. He made the call, Ray said. No preamble, no greeting. Just those 4 words delivered in the voice of a man who had been waiting for something and was now watching it arrive exactly on schedule. I pushed back from the table and walked into the hallway. When 23 minutes after your wife left his building, Ray said. He held out longer than I expected, honestly. Most men in his position would have reached for the phone before she hit the elevator. A pause filled with the sound of data being pulled. He used a burner bought it this morning, which tells me he had already been thinking about making this call before Sylvia walked in. Her visit accelerated his timeline, but he was already frightened. Who did he call? A number that routes through 4 relay points before it terminates at a server cluster in Nicosia, Cyprus, Ray said. We have had that number flagged for 19 months. It belongs to the primary communications node for the financial network above him, the people whose money he has been moving. I heard Ray pull something up on a screen. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. FinCEN's monitoring system captured the full audio. Eugene, I am going to summarize what was said, because some of the language is operational shorthand, but the substance is this. Dominic told them his domestic situation had become compromised. He used that word specifically. Compromised. He asked for what he called extraction assistance. He asked them to pull him out, I said. He asked them to make his legal exposure go away, Ray said. Which in the context of this network means the same thing, just with more steps. Another pause. They told him no. The hallway was very still. They cut him loose, I said. They did not even let him finish the sentence, Ray said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite satisfaction, more like the recognition of a pattern completing itself. When you are a middleman for an organization like this, and you become a liability, they do not send help. They go quiet. They let whatever is coming come, and they are already moving the money somewhere else before the door closes on you. Ray's tone shifted into something more deliberate. But here is what matters, Eugene. That phone call, a domestic actor reaching out to a foreign financial network to request assistance in evading federal investigation that is conspiracy to obstruct justice under 18 U.S.C. 1512. It is also evidence of the underlying conspiracy that ties everything else together. The wire fraud, the money laundering, the identity fraud against Claire, all of it now connects upward to a foreign criminal enterprise, which elevates the entire case to a different level of federal jurisdiction entirely. Monica, it closes the case from the top, I said. Arthur submitted the DOJ referral to the Public Integrity Section at 8 this morning, Ray said. I have been feeding the wire data to a contact at Fiancé all day. The call Dominic just made is the last piece. I am flagging it formally right now and routing it directly to the federal prosecutor Arthur identified. A brief pause. Eugene, a federal judge is going to sign an arrest warrant in the next 2 hours. You should know that. I leaned against the hallway wall and looked at the ceiling. 30 years. 30 years of operating in the spaces between visible authority and actual consequence of understanding that the distance between what was happening and what could be proven was the only territory that mattered. I had spent 3 decades learning how to close that distance for other people's problems in other people's countries. I had just closed it for my daughter. The LLC registrations, I said. Claire's name. The federal judge signed the vacating order at 10:52 this morning, Ray said immediately. Arthur filed the motion with the forgery affidavit at 7:45. The order came back in 3 hours and 8 minutes, which is the fastest I have ever seen that kind of motion processed, and I have been doing this for 26 years. A pause. Claire Harlan's name does not appear on any active corporate registration in the United States. As of 11 o'clock this morning, it is done. Something moved through my chest that I did not have a precise word for. Not relief, exactly. Relief implied I had been uncertain of the outcome, and I had not been. It was something quieter than relief. The specific settling that happens when a thing you have been holding for 2 days is no longer yours to hold. Ray, I said. Thank you. Don't, he said in the same tone he had used when I thanked him yesterday. Just make sure the right things happen in the right order. The line went quiet for a moment. For what it is worth, I have traced money for the federal government for 23 years. I have pulled threads on cartels and terror networks and sanctions violators. Dominic Voss is the first person I have ever seen hand investigators a complete case against himself in under 48 hours. Another pause. Your family did that, Eugene. Not me. He ended the call. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I walked back to the kitchen doorway. Claire was sitting at the table now, her hands flat on the surface in front of her, looking at nothing in particular. Sylvia was at the counter with her back turned, rinsing something in the sink, giving Claire the specific gift of not being watched. I pulled out the chair across from my daughter and sat down. "Claire," I said. "It is done." She looked up at me. Her eyes searched my face for a long moment, the way she had searched it her whole life, for signals for the thing behind the thing I was saying. "Done," she repeated. "Your name has been cleared from everything he put it on. The legal action against you has no foundation to stand on. The people who need to know what he has been doing, they know." I held her gaze. "It is done." Claire pressed both hands over her mouth. Her shoulders went up and then down hard, and the sound that came out of her was not crying exactly. It was the sound of a breath that had been held for 8 months, finally releasing all at once. She dropped her forehead to the table, and her whole body shook with it, the long, silent heaving of someone who has been braced for impact for so long that the absence of impact is its own kind of devastation. Sylvia crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, put both hands on Claire's shoulders, and held on. I did not move. I just sat across from them and let it happen, because some things need to complete themselves without interruption, and this was one of them. After a while, Claire lifted her head. Her face was wet and red and completely open in a way I had not seen it in 2 days. She looked at me and said, her voice still breaking in places, "What happens to him now?" "That Timothy," I said, "is no longer our problem. Arthur called at 3:48. I took the phone out to the porch, where the afternoon had gone cold and bright. The kind of October afternoon that makes Virginia look like a painting someone hung in a window. "They went in at 3:30, Arthur said. 12 minutes ago. "How many?" "4. 2 from the Bureau's Counterintelligence Division, 2 from the Financial Crimes Unit." His voice was steady and professional. "No announcement, no press. They cleared security using credentials that will not appear in any public directory of federal personnel, which was your specification and which I passed along." A pause. Dominic was in his office. He did not attempt to leave. I think by that point he understood that leaving was no longer one of his options. I looked out at the tree line. The pines were very dark against the bright sky. "Mercer," I said. "Taken into custody at the courthouse at 3:15, Arthur said. His clerk called his attorney before the agents reached his chambers. The attorney arrived 6 minutes after the agents did, which tells you something about the attorney. A quiet beat. "Eugene?" It went cleanly. Everything went exactly as it needed to go. I thanked him and ended the call, and stood on the porch for a moment, holding the phone loosely in one hand. Then I went inside. Claire was in the kitchen washing the afternoon's coffee mugs at the sink, her back to me. Sylvia was at the table reading something, one of the books she kept in a stack by her chair, the kind of thick, serious nonfiction she had been reading since I first met her, and had never once apologized for enjoying. The kitchen was warm and smelled like the soup Sylvia had put on an hour ago, and the wood stove in the living room was putting out a steady low heat, and the whole house had a quality to it that it had not had 24 hours ago, the quality of a place where the threat was gone. Claire heard me come in and turned around. She read my face the way she had been learning to read it for the last 2 days, differently than she had read it her whole life, now that she knew what was underneath. "It happened," she said. It was not a question. "It happened," I said. She exhaled slow and long and turned back to the sink. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches from where they had been holding. "Is he?" "Federal custody," I said. "Both him and Judge Mercer." Claire was quiet for a moment. She turned the water off and dried her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle very slowly and carefully, like she was doing something she needed to concentrate on. Then she turned around again and leaned back against the counter and looked at me with an expression that had several things in it at once, relief and exhaustion, and something older underneath both of those. "Dad," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "All of this." She gestured vaguely, a gesture that took in the last 3 days and everything that had happened in them. "Was any of it hard for you? Or is it just automatic? Is it just what you know how to do?" I crossed to the table and sat down, thought about the honest answer. "The tactical parts are automatic," I said. 30 years makes most of it automatic. The cameras, the calls, the sequence that is just muscle memory. I looked at my hands on the table. The rest of it was not automatic at all. Claire came and sat across from me, the same chair she had been sitting in since yesterday morning. "What was the rest of it?" "Sitting in that living room in the dark after you went to sleep," I said. "Looking at that photograph they put in the envelope, thinking about every Tuesday for 8 months that I did not pick up the phone and call you and you did not tell me what was happening, and both of those things were true at the same time." I met her eyes. "That part was not automatic. That part I am going to be working on for a while." Claire's chin trembled once. She pressed her lips together hard and got it under control. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to." "I know," I said. "I know exactly why you didn't tell me, and I am not asking you to have done it differently." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "I am just telling you that it was hard. Because you asked." She looked down at my hand over hers for a long moment. Then she turned her hand over and held on the grip she had used in the elevator. The grip she had used on the stairs. The same grip she had been using since she was small enough that my whole hand covered both of hers. "3 words," she said quietly. "3 words," I said. "Any time, any circumstances, that is all it ever needs to be." Sylvia looked up from her book across the table, caught my eye, and looked back down without saying anything. Outside, the afternoon light was going amber through the pines, and the shadows were getting long, and somewhere at the end of the driveway, the gravel was settling into the cold ground, quiet and still and completely, finally empty. Arthur called one final time at 6:12 in the evening. I was on the back porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching the last of the daylight leave the sky in layers first. The orange, then the rose, then a long, deep blue that settled over the tree line like something permanent. Inside, I could hear Claire and Sylvia in the kitchen, the sound of cabinet doors and running water, and 2 voices moving back and forth in the comfortable, overlapping way of people who have been talking for hours and have finally found their way back to ordinary conversation. That sound alone was worth everything. "I have the full picture now," Arthur said when I answered. "Do you want it all, or just the summary?" "Summary," I said. Then the full picture. "Summary is this: it went correctly. Completely and correctly." A brief pause. "Full picture is more interesting." I set the cold coffee down on the porch railing and leaned against the post. "Tell me." Dominic was processed and placed in federal detention at 4:45, Arthur said. His attorney arrived at 5, the one Mercer had recommended, which tells you the attorney had not yet understood the scope of what he was walking into. The attorney asked which division was holding his client. The agent who answered gave him a unit designation that I know for a fact does not appear in any public directory of federal law enforcement. Arthur's voice was dry and precise. The attorney asked to see credentials. The credentials he was shown were entirely legitimate. He has simply never encountered that particular unit before, and neither has most of the legal community in this city. How did Dominic take the processing? I asked. Quietly, Arthur said, which surprised the agents, I think. They were expecting resistance. He had spent 3 days being aggressive and threatening and certain of his own position. But by the time they came through his office door, he had apparently run out of certainty. A pause. He asked one question during processing. He asked who had put this together. What did they tell him? That the investigation had multiple contributing sources and that he would receive full disclosure through appropriate legal channels. Arthur's tone carried the faintest edge of satisfaction, which is accurate as far as it goes. And then, Arthur said he asked if he could use his phone. They allowed him one personal search standard procedure. He typed a name into his browser. Arthur stopped for a moment, and in that pause I heard something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory. He typed your name, Eugene. The back porch was very still. What came up, I asked, though I already knew. For the first 17 seconds, nothing, Arthur said. Same as every other time he has searched for you over the past 3 days. No results, no images, no records of any kind. Arthur's voice was measured and deliberate, placing each word with care. Then the page finished loading. There was a single result. One Wikipedia entry, short, no photograph. He read it in approximately 12 seconds. Arthur paused. Then he put the phone face down on the table, looked at his attorney and said, and I am quoting the agent who was in the room, "Tell them I will cooperate fully with everything. Tell them whatever they need, I will give them." His attorney started to advise caution, and Dominic said, I am done taking advice from people who do not understand what I just read. I picked up the cold coffee and took a sip, and looked out at the dark tree line. What did the entry say? I asked because saying it out loud completed something. 19 words, Arthur said. Eugene Harlan, 19th Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, served 2001 through 2018, Distinguished Intelligence Medal Citation classified, currently retired, 19 words. 30 years of work, and the version that existed in the public record was 19 words long and had no photograph attached to it. That was exactly how I had wanted it. That was exactly how it should be. The cooperation agreement, I said. Claire's name is completely absent from any charging document. Her name does not appear anywhere in the federal case, Arthur said immediately. The vacating order this morning removed her from the LLC registrations. The fabricated complaint Dominic filed has been formally withdrawn, and the court record annotated to reflect that it was filed in bad faith. Judge Mercer's involvement in certifying it has been referred to the Judicial Conduct Authority as a separate matter. A pause. As far as the federal record is concerned, Claire Harlan is a private citizen with no connection to this case, except as a victim of identity fraud, which is documented and which Dominic has already confirmed in his initial cooperation statement. Something in my chest settled the rest of the way down. The network above him, I said. The 11 countries. Sir FinCEN and the Bureau are already coordinating with Interpol and the relevant foreign financial intelligence units, Arthur said. That investigation will take years. Dominic's cooperation makes him a significant asset. He knows the domestic architecture of the entire operation. His attorney is going to spend the next 6 months negotiating what that cooperation is worth. A pause. He is not walking away from this, Eugene, but he may walk away from it eventually, after a very long time, in a different context than maximum security federal detention. That is the system working, I said. Yes, Arthur agreed. It is. I thanked him. He told me not to. I ended the call. I stood on the back porch for a few minutes in the dark and the cold, listening to the pines and the distant sound of my wife and daughter talking in the lit kitchen behind me. Then the back door opened, and Claire came out carrying a fresh cup of coffee in each hand, wearing my old barn jacket over her sweater, because she had found it on the hook by the back door, and it was cold, and it was there. She held one mug out to me. "Yours went cold," she said. I watched it happen from the window, and I kept thinking I should bring you a new one, and then I kept not doing it, and finally I decided that was ridiculous. I took the mug. The coffee was hot and very good, and I wrapped both hands around it. Claire pulled my barn jacket tighter and looked out at the tree line, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She was quiet for a moment, not the frightened quiet of the last 3 days, but something different. Something that had more room in it. "Is it really over?" she asked. "The part that was ours to finish," I said. "Yes," she nodded slowly, looking at the dark pines. "I keep waiting to feel something specific," she said. "Relief, I guess. Or I don't know. Something that feels like an ending." "Sometimes it does not feel like an ending," I said. "Sometimes it just feels like the next morning coming." Claire considered that for a moment. Then she leaned her shoulder against mine the way she had done since she was small enough to fit under my arm, and looked out at the October dark together with me. "Dad," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." 3 words, I said. That is all it ever needed to be. The pines stood very still in the dark. The sky above them was full of stars, and the gravel at the end of the long driveway lay quiet and cold and empty, and it was going to stay that way. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part of that week was. They expect me to say the rock through the window, or the photograph of Claire sleeping, or the moment I opened that safe for the first time in 6 years. It was none of those things. The hardest part was sitting in the dark on a Tuesday night, realizing that the person I had spent 30 years protecting strangers for, I had not called in 4 months. If there is one thing I would tell you, it is this: do not be like me. Do not let the people you love become the ones you forget to check on, because you assume they are fine. Strength without presence is just absence with a good excuse. I believe that every family carries a moment where it either holds together or it does not. Ours held. Not because of anything I did in those 3 days, but because Claire sent 3 words instead of 0. That was her courage, not mine. And I believe I know that something larger than the 2 of us was working in that. God does not always remove the storm, but He has a way of making sure the right people are standing on the porch when it arrives. This is one of my grandpastories, not a perfect story, but an honest one. If this family revenge story moved something in, you leave a comment below and tell me what it meant to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe a father's love does not have an expiration date, subscribe so you never miss another revenge story like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and perspective. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what feeds your spirit.